day. Like, that will make you far more happy than the guy who wakes up in a mansion and gets into his BMW or whatever. He's used to doing that. He does it every day. If he finds $1 on the ground, he doesn't care. It doesn't mean anything to him. And equally, like, you know, someone with all these things, maybe his BMW breaks down by the side of the highway. He's really pissed off. He's having a terrible day. Having all that shit doesn't change the fact that he's happy or unhappy. He's going to be unhappy because his normal thing is being fucked with. So this is kind of where this imagery and the symbolism comes in, because Crowley's like, as long as we keep our goals to something that we can continually strive for, continually go for, then this kind of joy in going toward these goals, joy in our own strength, joy in overcoming obstacles, becomes something that we can experience on a daily basis if we keep working toward these things. And it's a great, and I think that we really do live in a culture which encourages people to try to be happy, or happiness is, what I should say actually, is happiness is equated with success. And this is ridiculous on the face of it. And I love when people do have ridiculous ideas, ridiculous beliefs, you know, things that are on the face of them completely stupid and completely illogical. And there's always some idiot in the crowd who says, oh, well, whatever makes them happy, that's fine. And it's like, no, wrong is wrong, right is right. If you're incorrect, I should say wrong, I suppose that implies morality, but correct is correct, incorrect is incorrect, and if something is incorrect, it doesn't matter if it's making you happy or not. That's not the point. It's not the point of life. Yes, and on that note, this brings us to the card, which is totally reinvented, where there's no sort of even shades of the previous decks, which is the Aeon card. Originally, in the older tarot, it's shown as the Last Judgment, where the dead rise up at the end of things, at the final revelation, and the dead rise up to be judged. Crowley got rid of this altogether, partly because, and a large part of this has to do with the role that death plays in Thelema. Every religion has to grapple with the idea of death. Essentially, it's one of the main human questions. Crowley, in some of his works, actually identifies suffering in itself as the root of all forms of religion. When people suffer, they want to know why. They want to have answers for questions. And that's what gets people asking questions, because when they are happy, no one says, oh, why am I happy? Where did this come from? It's not a question that you ask, really, because you're happy. You just kind of enjoy it. When you suffer, on the other hand, you want to know what the fuck is going on. And death is sort of that ultimate form, that ultimate fear, final destination, all that shit. But what Crowley wants to do with the idea of death is say, no, it's not a permanent thing. We shouldn't look at death as anything different than a sunset. It's just the end of one life, moving on to the next. It's not a big deal. It's certainly not something that we should be afraid of or worried about. The whole concept of a last judgment is puts with the idea that death is some kind of final condition that we end with, and B, well, Crowley believes that this whole concept was superseded when he got the Book of the Law and sort of goes into the next, and we start the new Aeon. So, to him, this last judgment thing already happened in a sense, or it's taken place. So this is antiquated, this whole idea. So he tosses it out and he puts in the card that he calls the Aeon, which is sort of a reproduction of the stellar revealing, and in a sense, it changes the divinatory meaning of the card completely. In Crowley's summary at the end, he just calls it, like, what this card means is that a step has been taken. It's a sign that you're moving in that direction, and you're definitely taking a step and doing something, moving forward, which is a big change. It takes the sort of finality out of that idea, and it takes the finality out of the whole cycle of the major arcana in general, because it is the second last card, and it's sort of a way of expressing that idea that, okay, we are in the current of the new Aeon, and nothing's finished. We're moving on, and the current is going to continue to spread and continue to take over the old Aeon concepts that still exist in our institutions, in our social ideas, and we should be expecting to see them erode and erode and erode, and that will happen over, and that will be, we'll get back to that idea in a minute. So we've talked a bit about the angel's intentions, or what I see, what my opinion is on the angel's intentions of initially giving Dee and Kelly this system and having it move on through Crowley's work and spread out. The timing of this book is very significant. It came out around the end of World War II. And this was a big deal for Crowley because he saw, in two world wars, he saw a great deal, I talked in the beginning of this about how a great deal of occult material was destroyed. Well, he saw that happen. That was his initial motive for publishing 777 and putting secret Golden Dawn papers in the public eye and publishing them so people could buy them. He realized that if this stuff didn't get out there, then it had the potential to be destroyed and lost forever. So this was sort of the motivation for his efforts doing that. So I want to talk a little bit about Crowley's motivation for putting this out there. In his letters to Frieda Harris, he has a couple of ideas, and there are a few things that he's worried about floating around. One thing that he was greatly concerned with, which we've totally lost, and it's actually kind of disappointing that the modern OTO didn't keep this restriction. Crowley insisted very strongly that the cards were not to be sold without a copy of the book. He felt that that would encourage them to be used for fortune telling, for scams, for people doing things with them that he really which he saw was sort of to profane this information. So he wanted to make sure that anyone who got the cards got the book. And his original idea, that when it did finally get printed, they did a fairly expensive printing, but they were both worried about doing that at the time. He was talking about actually doing a printing with no pictures, no color plates, on the cheapest paper possible, the cheapest way that he could put it out possible. Part of this was because England was living in the shadow of war. Food was rationed, supplies were rationed. People just did not have the money to spend on editions of books like the ones he put out with like when he originally published Book 4. I forget it was ridiculously expensive. Like he was using particular inks that had magical significance, particular paper that had magical significance. You essentially had to be pretty rich to buy this book, which is part of the reason that it sold very few copies initially. But that was his intention, because Crowley just felt that there was no point in putting this stuff out there for the average working class person, because that person was not going to have the time to study and to practice and to do all these things. There's certain points in his own writings where he just basically says, it's like, if I had to hold down a regular job, there's no way I could have done any of this shit. It's like the fact that he was a man of leisure, that he could fart around, and he was essentially living on his trust funds or whatever the equivalent was at his time, gave him the leisure time to do all these things, to have these experiments, to drink and do coke and party and to make the discoveries that he made. Of course, I think that we can organize our time a little better, because we do live in a culture where pretty much everyone does have to hold down a job. We don't have a lot of just men of leisure kicking around these days, so everyone has to learn how to manage their time a little more effectively, whatever sacrifice that means that they have to make. The other thing that Crowley was majorly worried about at this point was his own reputation. Earlier in his life, he did a lot of very, extravagant things. He captured a lot of media attention. He was a tabloid darling. The Abbey of Thelema at Kefaloon attracted a lot of attention, particularly after Raoul Loveday died. And his wife sort of blamed Crowley for all this. Crowley's antics got him a lot of press in the papers, and he writes later on in his life that he kind of, at the time he thought this was great, and he liked the attention, I think, but later on he said that it caused problems for him, because when he's trying to get people to take him seriously, when he's talking about politics, and he's talking about science, and he's talking about all these things, he found that it was very difficult to get people in authority positions to take him seriously, just because the reputation that he had made for himself was working against him at that point. So at one point in his letters to Frieda Harris, he says, look, he's like, I don't even want my name on this. He says, tell people you wrote this book. Don't even tell them that I wrote it, because then it's just going to detract from it. Although I believe it did eventually get published under his name, but this was a big concern for him initially, whether or not he should even be associated